Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Onward Ozarks one-on-one with Art Bridges Foundation. I am Randy Wilburn, the host of the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast, and I'm excited to bring you the Onward Ozarks series. It's a speaker series created by the Northwest Arkansas Council to provide organizations, companies, and individuals a platform to share news, events, and other information with a regional audience. And, for those of you that this is not your first rodeo and you've been with us a few times, you know that we do this event probably on a quarterly basis. We started out last year, so we're moving into our second year of production now, and we're really excited about that. We started in April of 2021, as Rob Smith likes to remind me, in a driving rainstorm, and we got a chance to talk about the new Sky Bridge at X&A Airport. And we had the great folks from Height Jackson on to share with us their vision for that Sky Bridge and how the expansion of the Northwest Arkansas Airport is going to take place. Other sessions that we've had, which have been outstanding and well attended, we did a meeting with local journalists, where we talked about the best ways to connect with local journalists, how you create a press release. We had a roundtable discussion about the kind of things that they want to see in order to talk about those in their publications or on their programs. And then it was a really informative session. I actually got a lot of feedback from that one. We also had an outstanding group of doctors, local doctors here, to talk about what else? COVID-19. We talked about the medical response to COVID-19 here in Northwest Arkansas. And we just wanted to give our perspective on things and how we are dealing with this pandemic. And certainly that was a wonderful conversation, and it really created another level of awareness for all of us here in Northwest Arkansas. And then finally, we wound up the end of last year, talking about recycling for business, something that you don't normally hear talked about that often. But we had a great program where we introduced some of the individuals that serve the recycling community here in Northwest Arkansas and how businesses can get more involved and make sure that they are recycling as much as they can on a regular basis. And so that kind of wound up the year 2021 as far as Onward Ozarks is concerned. And I think we've been able to capture the essence of what Northwest Arkansas is all about, the movers and the shakers and the people that are making things happen on a regular basis. So we want to continue in that vein with the speaker series here in 2022. You always have to one-up yourself. So that is what the Northwest Arkansas Council is going to try to do in 2022, and I hope I can help them with that. And today we have a very special program. We are featuring the Art Bridges Foundation, and we are sitting one-on-one today with Paul Provost, who is the CEO of the Art Bridges Foundation. And Paul was appointed the CEO of the Art Bridges Foundation in August of 2019. Paul is a graduate of Princeton University. He holds both an MA and a PhD in the history of art and archaeology. Provost was a curator of paintings, drawings, and sculpture at the New York Historical Society before joining staff at Christie's in New York, where he was the director of trust and estates and later became deputy chairman. In addition, he has more than 25 years of experience as a teacher, guest lecturer, and committee member at organizations ranging from Williams College to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, or MoMA, as we like to call it. And so without further ado, I want to welcome Paul Provost here. And I want to give you guys, before we actually let Paul talk, I want to give you guys just a couple of ground rules. We have a chat. We are monitoring the chat. So if you have questions as we go through this presentation, please ask them in the chat. And there will be time for Q&A at the end of this presentation, but I really want you to key in on what Paul is talking about as we go through this beginning part of the session. And we will certainly get to all your questions. We have a lot of people registered, and I want to thank all of you that have registered for this event. I want to remind you that we have 75 Uber Eats cards at a $15 value. We keep upping the game. So each time we do this, we add more money to it. But we have Uber Eats cards for the first 75 that registered for this program. We appreciate you. You will get an email with the instructions on how to access that card. And we want to thank you again for being here for this event live. And we also want to acknowledge those that see this later on. Please watch it. Please share it. And certainly give us feedback here at the Northwest Arkansas Council. So, Paul, how are you doing this morning?
I am great, doing very well. And it's a great pleasure to be on with all of you. And I'll just say quite quickly, when I got a message from all of you at the Northwest Arkansas Council about Art Bridges being part of these Onward Ozarks program, I was very excited about it because Art Bridges is really a national platform, but we're based here in Bentonville. So this is a real opportunity for us to talk a little bit to our friends and colleagues in the region about what we're doing. And even though we're here in Northwest Arkansas, we have a national platform, but it's great to be able to talk with all of you about what we're up to. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So why don't you give folks the Cliff Note version of who the Art Bridges Foundation is, why it started, and kind of what you guys are up to right now?
Sure. And I guess actually one quick thing before we jump in is I neglected to say congratulations to Arkansas on an amazing game last night. So
yeah,
I'm sure there's lots of excitement out there, and so I just wanted to say can't let that go without saying warm congratulations to everyone. That's like really fantastic.
Woo pig.
So so why don't we just go ahead with a video and we can run through that, and then I can jump back in and talk about some more things about Art Bridges.
Thank you.
Art Bridges' mission is to expand access to American art around the nation. And I often think that we have these pillars of programs that we do to execute and to deliver on that mission. In a thumbnail, Art Bridges is an art and art education delivery system. You know, we're in the business of delivering art and education around that art, but that's only part of it. The next part is activating these works of art once we distribute them and get them on the road. So it's a combination of distribution and education as well as activation and getting audiences in.
What we can do with Art Bridges in terms of attracting new audiences that traditionally don't think a museum is for them. I mean, I think the opportunities we have and the funding that we can give all of the museums around the country to really tell a new and expanded story and bring in new audiences, to me, that is just thrilling.
Yeah.
You know, I'm so excited about the new Loan Depot program. Can you talk a little bit about where we are in that process and what we ultimately hope that will do?
The Collection Loan Program is going to be one of our signature programs for 2022. And I also think it probably is the program in its pilot phase now that is going to have the greatest impact for what Art Bridges might do in the future as we continue to grow the program and expand the program. At Art Bridges, those values, diversity, equity, access, and inclusion, are tremendously important to us. And I like to think, you know, and obviously, Alice, those are values that you hold dear. And so I think about those values as being infused in all the programs that we do.
If we have our dreams of what can Art Bridges accomplish, you know, one of my dreams is that through all of these co-art programs, the long-term loan program, the traveling exhibitions, is that museums get to know each other on a more personal basis, on a working relationship. And I think one of the things that I'm so thrilled about are some of the relationships developing between the large and smaller museums.
One of the most important things long-term with our partners is the fact that we are interested in being engaged with them over a long period of time.
Right.
It's not as though we're in and we're out and it's just a series of one-offs, that there's a consistent engagement with our partners, large ones, mid-sized, smaller institutions, because I think if we're really committed to creating change, the way we do that is by being engaged in a substantive way across time.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that video. That was great to see Alice Walton sharing her vision for Art Bridges and the fact that she has put this program together. Paul, I'd like for you to kind of expand upon this whole idea. You shared when we had a conversation before this event that there was you wanted to create a clarification for what Art Bridges is all about, and you likened it to the difference between Crystal Bridges and what Art Bridges is actually able to do for museums across the country.
Yeah, sure, Randy. And I'll say too, before I jump in on that, the video is fantastic and it's really wonderful to be able to show our board chair and founder, Alice Walton, her real vision for Art Bridges. And it's kind of, I am absolutely privileged to work with her. She's my board chair, she's my boss, and but she is visionary and an extraordinary individual in terms of her understanding of the art world and the museum world. And also, really the most important thing about it in many ways is, I mean, Art Bridges' mission is to expand access to American art. That is the recurring theme about Art Bridges, is about access, access, access. And I'll say too, is that access is a pretty big bucket that diversity, equity, and inclusion fall into, are included in. And so diversity, equity, inclusion, and access are really key values of ours. And those are key values of our board chair as well. So with respect to our relationship with Crystal Bridges, I think about Crystal Bridges and Art Bridges, we're really siblings. We're officially completely separate and distinct, but I look at us as sibling organizations, and I think we're the younger sibling, and Crystal Bridges is the older sibling that's been around a while. There's lots of collaboration between Crystal Bridges and Art Bridges, and we love our colleagues over there. But again, officially we're separate and distinct. One thing which Crystal Bridges does, which I think is an extraordinary thing, as Alice has acknowledged that there was not much access to great works of art when she grew up in Northwest Arkansas. And so what Crystal Bridges has done has provided a platform for access to extraordinary works of art in this region. If you wanted to see decent things, you needed to go to Tulsa, or you had to go up to Kansas City. And now there's this extraordinary amount of great works of art in Northwest Arkansas, or this larger region. And it's amazing when I go over to the galleries at Crystal Bridges to see the different types of people that are there. So the whole notion of providing access is happening in a real way. What Art Bridges is doing is doing that type of thing, but nationally. And so we're looking at communities around the nation to see where is their lack of access, so that we can provide great works of art there, and so that individuals in those communities that don't have much access do have access to great things. And so in essence, you can think about what a Bentonville or Northwest Arkansas was like before. What are those places around the nation? And so we're working with about 170 museums right now. Some of them are in major metropolitan areas, but others are in smaller areas and more regional areas. And this is a slide here which talks about the National Network of Museum Partners. So we work with museums, like big, impressive museums with extraordinary collections like LACMA, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. But then we're other partners that we're working with. Missoula is an amazing partner, and that's a dandy museum. People usually don't think of Missoula, Montana as a pretty innovative place, but they're doing great work. Or a place like the St. Petersburg Museum in St. Petersburg, Florida. They're doing really great work. One of the other things too, I think as a general matter about our partners, is that we're trying to have our partners work with each other. And there's something about the museum world. Generally, a lot of smaller museums don't have access to collaborate with some larger museums. And so we're looking at a way, or one of the things that Art Bridges is also doing is we're really kind of shifting the paradigm about how museums can work with each other, so that we're getting smaller museums to begin working with bigger museums. Because generally the bigger museums play with each other, and the smaller museums get shut out of that. And so I don't think of us so much as disruptor in terms of how we're moving in the museum world, but I think of us more as a catalyst for change, and changing how institutions work with each other. That's a general sense. In terms of thinking about the different programs that we have too, and I mentioned this in the video. At heart, too, part of what Art Bridges is doing is we're kind of in the business of art distribution and art education. So, and I think about when we're looking at our mission of expanding access, there are certain pillar programs that we have in terms of how we deliver on that. And I can talk a little bit about some of those. One of the primary things that we do is we organize traveling exhibitions, and I don't know if we can. Yeah, and here's a slide with some of the traveling exhibitions. And basically what a traveling exhibition is, it's a group of works of art. The type of exhibitions that Art Bridges travels, most all those works of art come from one institution. One exception is one of these on the slide here, the cross-pollination work, the image of the hummingbirds on the right-hand side. But most of our typical traveling exhibitions, what we do is we partner with a museum that has broad, deep collections. And we organize an exhibition of works of art from one institution, and then we take that exhibition and we put it on the road and send it to smaller museums around the country. So for example, up here we've got the Walker Evans American Photographs. That's an exhibition that was organized by MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Great institution. They actually had this show in their own galleries and a number of years ago, and they reconstituted it for Art Bridges so that we could travel it and put it on the road. So Walker Evans American Photographs is going to 5 venues. When it first opened, we sent it to the West Virginia University Museum, and then it went to the Portland, Maine Museum of Art. The next exhibition is a local one, and this is one of the few times we've actually had an opportunity to show works of art in Arkansas, but it's going to the Wingate Museum of Art at Hendrix College down in Conway. It has just opened up this week. It will be on view down there to March 18th. This is the first time that a work of art, or that an exhibition of works by Walker Evans has ever been shown in the state of Arkansas. So I would really encourage all of you. It's just 3 hours down the road, and it's really an amazing exhibition. Then it's also going to 2 other smaller venues around the country. So we've got 5 venues where this traveling exhibition is going. The image in the center of Fighters for Freedom. William H. Johnson was a Black painter, and has a great group of things that are at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. So we partnered and provided funding to the Smithsonian American Art Museum to organize this exhibition. And in total, it's going to be on the road for about 40 months, and it's going to go to as many as 14 museums around the country. And the way the funding works is that we, again, provide funding to the Smithsonian so that they could organize it. And then we provide funding to each one of the exhibition venues that will be receiving the exhibition. Along with that, whenever we send works of art on the road, either as individual works of art or as a traveling exhibition like these, we also provide funding for what we call learning and engagement. It's basically programming. It's one thing to send the works of art there, but then we've got to activate them and we've got to get audiences in the door. So we have an amazing learning and engagement team. A colleague of mine named Brittany Vernon oversees that group, and they do amazing work with our partners about working with our museum partners to do audience outreach, community outreach, to figure out, okay, what communities can we get in the door to see these things that otherwise wouldn't be coming to that museum? And so again, it's one thing to get the works of art there, but the programming that we do around them is really how the access happens. That's how we get people in the door to see these things. And I'll say one other thing thing about this, the image on the right-hand side, that's an exhibition called Cross-Pollination, Heed, Cold Church in Our Contemporary Moment. This is an area where Art Bridges does partner closely with Crystal Bridges, and this is an exhibition that Crystal Bridges in part organized, and the curatorial team at Crystal Bridges did a great job, and there actually was a curator at Art Bridges that was working on that as well. That's gone through to 5 different venues. This is a lone show, so all the things aren't from Crystal Bridges. They're from a number of different venues that have come together for this exhibition, but it's on view right now at Crystal Bridges. So I'd encourage folks to come over to Crystal Bridges and see this. It's a pretty interesting exhibition that combines or addresses issues of nature and how artists respond to the nature, how they did that in the 19th century, and how they do that today. So again, a fantastic exhibition, very tight and focused, but it's filled with some very, very interesting ideas. So this is kind of a bit of a buffet, if you will, to understand the kind of the different types of exhibitions that we do and different types of things that we send around the country.
Yeah, and and I'm glad you kind of brought those up and gave us kind of a highlight of them. I mean, for those that don't know, Walker Evans was an outstanding photographer, and if you haven't had a chance to see his work, you need to take time, as Paul said, just to drive. I mean, it's literally 2.5 hours to Conway. Just don't get a ticket rushing down there, but head down to Hendrix College and take a look at this exhibit, because his photographs are absolutely amazing, and he captures an era of time that it really gives you. I mean, there's something about photography that kind of transports you in time and place to where those photographs were taken, and that's what Paul Walker Evans photos are able to do. So I encourage you to check those out. I did have a question for you, Paul. As you had mentioned about the learning and engagement, does it change? Does the programmatic nature of the learning engagement pieces change depending on where these are being exhibited, or is there kind of like a kind of a menu of learning and engagement that you offer at each museum?
It's really bespoke and really depends on the museum we're working with, and also the works of art, whether it's an exhibition or individual works of art or a group of works of art which we've sent to that institution, because different institutions have different goals and with what they're trying to do. So there are particular, I'll say for something, for example, there may be institutions that are borrowing the Fighters for Freedom show. That's that's a great exhibition by an important Black painter. And there may be institutions, there may be museums where this exhibition is going, where the museum decided that they wanted that exhibition in particular because they don't have many works like that in their collection. And if they want to get an African-American community into their museum, they need to begin showing things that will resonate with that community. So the conversation with our learning and engagement team and that museum tends to be around, okay, what are the programs that we can help fund that'll get those folks in the door? And maybe it's outreach with some community organizations or with other folks in the African-American community, which makes them aware of what the show is so that we can get them in the door. So those are the types of things that our learning and engagement department works with, and those are the types of conversations that happen with our museum partners. And it's interesting because we're kind of, we're a foundation officially, but we inhabit functionally a space in between a museum and a foundation. We collect, so we have curators, we have registrars. There are a lot of museum functions that we have, but then we make awards and give money away. So we have this foundation function as well. But we're really business to business. We're interested in expanding access to audiences, but we do that through our museum partners. So, so we're the ones who kind of help our museum partners to activate the collections we send to them or their own collections so they can get new audiences in the door and expand access.
Yeah, and I think you said it so perfectly when you talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and of course that's a word that is a concept, an idea that is certainly has gained more oxygen over the last few years. But access is important. And you just don't realize how you can impact people, even in a smaller venue or a smaller location, when you bring the quality of the work that you are sending around the country to those venues, because it all of a sudden sparks ideas. It sparks the minds of especially young people as they have access to this type of artwork, and it can make a difference. I mean, who knows what young amateur photographer will be down at Hendrix College and will visit the Wingate Museum and be so impacted that their life is changed by being able to see that.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I think would be fantastic. I mean, people say, well, what's a big vision, or what are these ideas for art bridges? I've often thought in some way, there may be some young person in some rural community where there's a small museum that Art Bridges has sent some works of art there, and that person goes in and sees them and gets inspired and says, wow, this really resonates with me, and that person decides to go into the museum field, and they end up as a director of the Met or MoMA. That's the idea in terms of providing access, and we have a program which we are just launching now, which is something called the Art Bridges Fellows Program. And this is it probably isn't a surprise to most everyone on here that the museum field is not very diverse. The museum field traditionally has been made up of people that look just like me. So we are trying to really make inroads and change that paradigm. So we've got a program which is in essence a jobs program for early career museum professionals of color. And we are placing these individuals at museums around the country. They're doing lots of work with us. So for example, there's a fantastic regional museum in Omaha called the Joslyn Art Museum. And we have a fellow there who's going to be working on Art Bridges projects that the Joslyn is doing with Art Bridges. The Joslyn is, if anyone ever has an opportunity to go to Omaha, they've got to go to the Joslyn. Great pictures, great collections. They are doing renovations and expansions. So they are closing their galleries. And so what Art Bridges is doing, we're taking about 50 of their best works of American art, and we're going to take them for about 3 years while they're doing their renovations and their galleries are closed. And we're sending groups of these works of art from the Joslyn Art Museum to a number of smaller regional museums around the country. And this is a program which is called the Collection Loan Program that Alice and I were talking about in the video. And the idea is getting works of art out of storage or getting works of art out of other museums into smaller regional museums around the country. This here is, these are works from Art Bridges' own collection. So not only are we working with places like MoMA or the Joslyn or some other museums to get things out of storage or to borrow things from those museums and send them around the country, we're actively acquiring and building our own collection. And what's great about our collection and what we're doing here, and I have to say that we've been able to build the collection pretty quickly. As I think about it, not as a glamour collection. Sure, there's some glamorous and some important works of art, but I'm really looking at our collection, the Art Bridges collection, as a working collection. And we deploy pictures to achieve certain goals. And so a lot of the things in the Art Bridges collection that we're acquiring are works of art that our partners are asking for. So those are works by artists of color, works by Black artists, women artists, boundary pushing art, things which people don't, which some of these smaller museum partners that we have, whether they're in Iowa or they're in El Paso, wherever they might be, they don't have access to those. So this is a great, to point out a couple of these things that you see here. These are works from the Art Bridges collection. And again, Art Bridges, I mean, we have offices off the square in Bentonville. So I don't think we'll ever be bricks and mortar and have galleries. Our galleries are in essence galleries all around the country. So this big splashy picture by Lee Krasner called Re-Echo, that's on loan. It's going to a small museum outside of New York City called the Hudson River Museum in Yonkers, New York. Yep. It's amazing because there's a place, just in the shadow of Manhattan, Yonkers, which doesn't, there are a lot of people in Yonkers that don't go into Manhattan to see MoMA or the Met or the Guggenheim or the Whitney. And what we're able to do is provide some extraordinary things for a place like the Hudson River Museum, where they do have an extraordinary collection, or they have amazing audiences nearby that are African American, that are Hispanic, that are Asian, and so we're trying to send things to them which resonate with those communities. This work, this Lee Krasner, and for people who don't know, Lee Krasner is the wife of Jackson Pollock, and she's been, and this is one of her most important pictures, I think, and actually this is one of my favorite pictures in the Art Bridges collection. And it is a kind of a really dandy, I usually say it's a kick-ass picture by Lee Krasner. And it's just like, it's a powerful, strong, beautiful abstract expressionist picture. But the palette, the colors are really beautiful. And when you see it in person, it's kind of amazing because there are these rich browns in there, but then you get these kind of wonderful pinks, and then those kind of vibrant greens. It's really an amazing picture, and I just love it. The work on the upper left by Barclay Hendricks, that's called Brenda P. Barclay Hendricks is a relatively, until recently, underappreciated African-American painter, and he did a lot of these extraordinary portraits and these figural pictures of people from his community that he knew. That Brenda P, that is right now, that is on loan at the Zimmerly Museum in Newark. No, it's in Brunswick, New Brunswick, New Jersey. Down below, this is a very interesting installation piece by Felix Gonzalez Torres. He's an artist who passed away, who died from AIDS a number of years ago, but he was very interested in installations and much more conceptual art. And so the work of art in that is the green candy that's laying against the wall. And basically it's called a candy, the type of work of art, it's a candy spill. And the part of the idea about this work of art is about the passage of time. It's about the notion of a changing world, and that people who come into the museum and see the piece are allowed to take a piece of candy and take it with them. So the work of art is changing all the time. And that's a pretty sophisticated work of art, and for us to be able to send that to some of our partners who never would have an opportunity to have a work of art is really meaningful. I'll make a couple other quick comments. The work by Henry Asawa Tanner on the upper right, that is a masterwork by probably the most important African-American painter of the 19th century in the United States. Henry Asawa Tanner did extraordinary work, and this is a work that we just acquired last year. And that is, we sent it to Dallas because it needed when we acquired it, it needed to have some conservation or restoration work done on it, and we've reframed it. And it's been on view at the Dallas Museum as a focus exhibition in and of itself, and then it will be going to the Memphis Brooks Museum, and it'll be on the road for quite a while. And the picture below that is another work by another African-American painter, Norman Lewis. And again, that artist is, his work is really coming into its own. And I think there's a real kind of a reassessment. A lot of these artists of color and women artists, and Art Bridges has been able to acquire things like this, which again, most of our museum partners would never, they don't have the budgets to acquire works of art like this, and they just don't have the access to them. So we get a lot of feedback from our partners who are thrilled to be able to use these works of art and show works of art of this quality and this rarity.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're taking me back, and that Lee Krasner piece, it's actually a fairly large piece if I remember correctly. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's about 4 feet by 4 feet.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's what I thought. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's so incredible to see this, and it's very refreshing. I will add just anecdotally that when I was a youngster matriculating through Howard University, I actually wanted to be an art historian. I wanted to work in a museum, but you said something very clear that you know, and at the time it was something that impacted me, was I didn't see anyone that looked like me in that art world. And I spent a lot of time at the museums there in Washington, D.C. And I just, as much as I thought about it, I said, well, man, maybe there's not a place for me there. And I think what you're doing is important right now, because for these generations that have come after me, after you, there are people that don't look like everybody that might see an opportunity in the art space that just didn't exist before.
Yeah. It's great, Randy. I didn't know that you went to Howard. We're working with Howard. Howard University has the museum. They have an amazing collection. They arguably have the most important collection of works by Black artists in the country. And one of the things about a place like Howard, and even though Howard is, you know, one of the most prominent and successful and well-resourced HBCUs, they don't have a lot of resources in the museum to get the stuff on the road. So actually, we're going to be working with Howard to, and we had a conversation with them just the day before yesterday. We're going to be working with Howard to put a traveling exhibition together for works of art from the Howard University Museum collection. It's all amazing, amazing works by 19th and 20th century African American artists. And then we're also going to be getting things from them to the collection loan program. Because what's extraordinary is that there are these smaller museums, if not all Met, MoMA, Chicago, Boston, that have these extraordinary collections. There are some smaller regional museums that have extraordinary depth in things. And so people wouldn't think that, Howard, a great mecca for X, but it turns out they are one of the best places to go to see extraordinary works by African-American painters. And there are other museums around the country like that too, where there's an extraordinary museum in Santa Fe called the IAIA MOCNA, the Museum of Contemporary Native American Art. They have one of the most extensive and robust collections of contemporary Native American anywhere else in the country. And so we're working with them right now. We have a traveling exhibition, which is going to a number of venues around the country of 20th century Native American art, 20th century indigenous art. And we're also going to be working with them to get stuff into the collection loan program, because there's just, the big museums don't have 10 works by contemporary Native American artists. And so the idea that we can begin to get these things on the road and fill that void that's what our job is.
Yeah, no, and it's funny. I thank you for mentioning that, because I actually spent an inordinate amount of time at the Howard University Museum, and it was just, I guess I was always amazed at the fact that I had access to it at all times. So I found myself in there on a regular basis, probably more than I care to mention. But thank you for mentioning that, and I think that's what you guys are doing. Again, is important. I'd love for you. I want to kind of move into talking about some of the community building programming and events, if we can dial into that specifically, because this programming is really, like you said, because you're accessing smaller museums in places that wouldn't typically see the light of day with larger exhibits. You guys are really able to make a dent and create greater art awareness, if you will. And I'd love for you just to kind of talk a little bit about that part of the community building programming and events that you guys undertake.
Yeah, again, so much of what we do, and when you think about expanding access, is also making certain that we get people in the door to see the works of art. Part of when I think about expanding access to American art, also it's creating and supporting programs that educate, inspire, and deepen engagement with local audiences and local communities. And so these are a couple examples that we have here. The photograph on the left is a program that we did with the San Antonio Museum of Art. We sent a number of things from the Art Bridges collection there, and then provided funding for them to do, basically as a mural project. They did several mural projects, and the whole notion of that is exactly what you mentioned a moment ago, Randy. It's about see yourself in art. So what we wanted to do is provide funding so that they could do some community engagement, which in turn helped those communities understand that they felt they belonged in the museum. The whole notion of belonging is something which the museum field is taking very seriously, and is it's a relatively new concept to be thinking about that so deeply and so strategically. So what this is here is it was local indigenous communities that made this mural, which is there at the San Antonio Museum. And there are also other murals around San Antonio, which were created providing the funding. And so in particular, this was a way for Art Bridges to provide support to San Antonio, to do outreach with an indigenous community and bring that community into the museum in a really substantive way. And there's so much around that. I think people, if you've seen it over at the Momentary here in Bentonville, there's a work of art outside, on the outside of the Momentary building, that says "You belong here," and that's a real statement about that. But that's a theme which runs through Art Bridges too, in terms of trying to help our partners create belonging for all of their audiences. I grew up going to museums. I always felt comfortable there. That was a space that was great. It never occurred to me that wasn't the case for everyone. And I've come to learn that in a really substantive way. That one thing that we're doing, particularly the way we can do that, is with the Art Bridges collection, is put works of art in these museums so that people understand, aha, I see that work relates to me, and I have a sense, and I have a place in that institution. That's what we've done with San Antonio there on the left, and on the right. Actually, it's a very interesting piece here. The work of art in the lower right-hand corner. It's a work in the Art Bridges collection, and it's by a native artist, Nicholas Galanin, who's from Sitka, Alaska. And we sent this particular sculpture and installation to Missoula, and this in particular was some programming that happened in the middle of the pandemic. And what's great is that we had it was a curatorial talk and discussion between the curator at Missoula, the artist in Alaska, and the Art Bridges curator, Ashley Holland, who is here in Bentonville. Now, if we had tried to get those three people together physically, to try to get someone from Alaska, Montana, and Arkansas, it would have been crazy in terms of trying to actually get that done. But because we did it on Zoom, it was an absolutely amazing program to have a dialogue between the artist, a live dialogue like this between the artist in Alaska, the work of art that was there in Montana, and the curator for Art Bridges is based here in Bentonville. And there was great dialogue around the piece and all of that. I'll say too, Missoula, one of their primary communities that they do lots of outreach with is their tribal community. And so it was a tremendously useful thing for them to borrow the work by Nicholas Galanin, because that is the type of thing that those communities can come in and say, aha, this is something that brings me in here. I belong here because they're works of art that they can identify with. I'll say that what's interesting too is that some of our smaller regional partners like San Antonio, like Missoula, they have community engagement down. And they have so much to teach some of the larger museums in the major metropolitan areas about community engagement, because they are, so I'm always astounded again and again when we work with our smaller regional partners. They're dug into their communities, and their boards and their funding come from there. But the museums in particular that are doing it well are doing it really, really well. And that's so refreshing to see that.
Yeah. There's a couple of good questions that have popped up. I'm curious to know, on that last point that you just mentioned, do you keep track of, or do you create case studies around that community engagement from a best practices standpoint, so that if others come to you and say, hey, Paul, how do we do this? You share examples of different museums around the country that are having success in this area?
Yeah, we do that. We absolutely do that. So in some ways, we do it in a, I don't want to say an anecdotal, we do it in an individual way. So for example, with something like the works of art in the Art Bridges collection, like this work by Nicholas Galanin that's here on the screen on the right, the way we've organized things, and a lot of that is, as a CEO, when I first came on board, we had no IT infrastructure at all. And I understood that for Art Bridges to be successful and grow to the extent that we are growing, and our board chair wants us to grow, a robust IT infrastructure would be critical. And so we've begun to build that out with various number of systems. One of the systems is a type of art database, which we have. And so what we do is something like the Nicholas Galanin, all the programming and everything that we've done that's happened around that work of art can travel with it through our systems. So the next museum that borrows the Nicholas Galanin, they can see the type of learning and engagement that other types of institutions have done. So in essence, we can carry, there's a record of the types of programs that have helped around that and the type of community engagement that they've done. The other thing which we do a lot of, which is critical, and the museum field is getting much better at that, it's something which is called evaluation. And basically what we do, we provide funding for lots of audience surveys and museum surveys with our museum partners. So when museums apply to us for funding, and we're funding these different projects, we don't call them grants, but when we provide funding for these different projects, we ask them a lot of questions when they apply, and then they're also required to fill out a final report once the project is over. And so we are learning things about who came in to see the exhibition, how many people came in to see the exhibition, all sorts of things like that. So we're gathering lots and lots of data all around the country so that we have a better picture about how we're moving the needle with respect to museums, but how what change might be looking like across museums around the country.
Okay. Now, and on that point, with that data that you're accessing and that you have access to, does somebody have to be a member of Art Bridges in order to be able to access that data? Is it readily available on your website? How would people go about getting some of that data that you do collect?
At this point, we're still, because we're so new, we've only been around for a couple of years. We have begun gathering that data ourselves. I think we anticipate as we grow and have opportunities to collate it and put it together in a certain way that would be in a certain format that would be useful for our partners, I'd imagine we begin sharing that out. But at this point, we just haven't. We're still a relatively small team. It takes a little while to begin to measure impact. I'll say, the pandemic has been a real pain in the neck for us because it's tough to measure impact at museums when they're closed. It's tough to measure impact when fewer audiences are going in. So, that's been a real challenge around it. I'll say that, that said, our museum partners have been incredibly resourceful and resilient throughout the pandemic. So I've been inspired by the extraordinary work that some of our smaller regional partners have done, just because they have been so resourceful and resilient, and they've been able to pivot and be creative and still maintain connections with their audiences. We provided funding to do that. When the pandemic hit, we launched a program, a big initiative called the Bridge Ahead Initiative, which provided funding for museums that were closed to stay in touch with their museum audiences. And then once they knew they were going to reopen, we provided funding for them to reopen, because people wouldn't think about this, but once you've closed a museum and then you've got to reopen it in the middle of a pandemic, it's expensive. There are a bunch of things that you've got to pay for, which wouldn't have been in your budgets that you hadn't thought of prior to that. So we helped out with about 150 partner museums with funding so that they could reopen effectively.
Okay. All right. Wow, that's amazing. So it sounds like what you're saying is the best is yet to come from Art Bridges. That there is a lot. You have a lot on your plate, and we don't want to put too much pressure on you. But I think everybody is going to be excited as we sit by and get a chance to see what you guys are able to do in the art world in terms of connecting different communities around the country. So I'm excited, as I'm sure you are. So.
Yeah, it's good. I'll have to say too that I am so fortunate to have an extraordinary staff, amazing team.
Can we show that video, that slide?
Oh, we got the last slide.
Yeah, it's
exactly.
I always want to acknowledge that this is the team, and I think it's important for people that are watching this to understand that this organization is based right here in Northwest Arkansas, yet they are touching every corner of this country from an art perspective. And I mean, it's not a huge group, but you guys are moving mountains to make things happen. And I certainly want to give credit where credit is due, especially to this wonderful team and for what you're doing, Paul, shepherding this group.
Well, thank you, Randy. No, I would say again, the Art Bridges staff, the team, they do extraordinary work. They're the ones that are really the ones that are creating access. I've joked with my board chair, Alice, as well, that, it's her vision for Art Bridges. And I said, it's her vision, it's her gospel. I'm just the preacher, and I'm there to get the work done. And so I'll say that, from our different departments, we have staff that have come from the museum world, because we have museum functions. As I said, we've got registrars, we have curators, we have people that oversee traveling exhibitions. We also have folks like in our learning and engagement group that are traditional, one would call it museum education. We're doing bang up work in that area. I mentioned the fellows program. We have a robust internship program. So we have interns that come from this coming summer. We're going to be having our interns on the ground. We've had interns when it was remote last summer and the summer before from all around the country, but the interns that we anticipate having this summer will be from all around the country. We also have some interns that we tap into the University of Arkansas, so that's great. That's one way we feel that we're connected to the region, is by having working closely with some of our, bringing our interns from the University of Arkansas. The other thing too is I'll say is that again, these are values from our board and our board chair, Alice Walton. We are absolutely committed to building a diverse team. I'm not a statistics guy, but we're about 55 or 60% diverse here at Art Bridges. We've got all sorts of different communities represented in our staff. And that is something that I'm tremendously proud that we've been able to do. It builds tremendous resiliency and makes us a stronger, more creative, more collaborative organization to get things done, and tremendously thoughtful from that perspective. And so I would say too is that that as an organization, or all of you who are in other organizations who are aiming to do that, it can be done. You need to be really intentional about it, but it's a really great thing to be able to build an organization like the one we have here at Art Bridges, and to be able to do it here in Northwest Arkansas.
Yeah, no, well, and a picture is worth 1,000 words, so you're absolutely correct. I appreciate this, Paul. This has really been enlightening and educating, and I know we have several questions that we want to ask, and some of them are things that you've kind of highlighted, but it would be great that you could maybe elaborate a little bit more. But Karen Minkle specifically asked, she said this work is incredibly exciting and important. Speaking of what you guys are doing at Art Bridges, what are your hopes for how expanding access with a DEI lens will change the museum field more broadly? What are your hopes as far as that's concerned in the next maybe 5 to 10 years with the work that you guys are doing?
Yeah, I'll say moving that needle has to happen on so many different levels, and people often think about that. It's what does that really look like? And I'll say that I think we're beginning to scratch the surface of it at Art Bridges, but our ambitions are much deeper when we're thinking about these types of things with our partner museums. So one thing, for example, which is an easy thing, we're building a diverse collection. We have a collection that reflects a lot of different voices and communities and backgrounds, whether it's Latinx material, we've got Asian American material, all sorts of stuff like that in the collection. And again, I like to think that the Art Bridges collection really reflects what America looks like. And I think we're interested in building a collection that reflects that, and working with our museums so that these museums around the country reflect that as well. But a lot of people, folks that aren't in the museum world, the idea of beginning to think about how to diversify or decolonize museums. A lot of museums are just very old-fashioned bureaucratic institutions that haven't thought tremendously carefully or in any substantive way about what structural issues are there. Most museum collections are not tremendously diverse. Most museum boards are not tremendously diverse. Most museum staff are not tremendously diverse. Most museum contractors are not tremendously diverse. So, the accountants and lawyers and all those types of folks that museums use, they haven't been thinking about that. Gift shops are something that we think about. Is a museum's gift shop Is it accessible, or is it all fancy stuff which is high priced? How about what does a museum's restaurant look like? Is it a fancy museum that people get priced out of, or is it a museum that people can afford and have access to it? So those are we're beginning to scratch the surface of helping our museum partners begin to shift and change from that perspective, but there's so much work to be done. It's hard work, but it's good work. And as we begin to see the needle moving on some of these things, it's really just extraordinary.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Another good question that came up from Michael Owen was how can one promote their work of art?
Let's see. I mean, it's very interesting because we do have some living artists in the Art Bridges collection. So it's not as though all of our artists are artists who've gone to the other side. We've got a lot of artists who are alive and well in the Art Bridges collection. It's interesting. I'll say that individuals who are have a creative side to them. A lot of the programs, for example, that Art Bridges does with our partners involve art and art making. That is a very inclusive approach to programming and community engagement. So I think there's a lot of that. I think, for example, Crystal Bridges has programs that are involved with things along those lines. So I think there are lots of opportunities that way for people to get involved.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I hope people are listening to this that are paying attention to what you just said so that they can get involved and definitely connect with you guys. Now, if somebody has asked, why did that piece of artwork behind you, could you tell us a little bit about that and why you chose that as your backdrop?
So that's one of the great things about the Art Bridges collection. So the piece behind me is my Zoom background. It is a work in the Art Bridges collection, which is by an important 20th century American artist named Arshile Gorky. And he's kind of an abstracted, a surrealist painter. And this is a work which is called Child's Companion. It's oil and canvas from 1945. Wonderful work. I don't know where this picture is right now. It's somewhere in the United States, in some gallery, and someone's enjoying it. But it's one of my favorite works too. As I said before, I think the Krasner is my favorite picture in the Art Bridges collection. I love this one because it's a good Zoom background. And every now and again, someone will say, "Is that painting actually behind you, Paul?" And I say, "No, it's not." So, but it's a good one.
But it is somewhere out there, that's for sure.
It is. So, it's on the road. Yeah.
Man, this has been great, Paul. You've really shared some great insight and information about what Art Bridges is doing. And I know, I mean, I knew who you guys were. I didn't know the extent of your reach in the art world around the country. And I'm really proud to say that I live in Northwest Arkansas, and you guys represent Northwest Arkansas very well in terms of what you are able to do. So congratulations to you and your team and everything that's going on, because I think that this is something that we didn't mention, but one of the reasons why a program like Art Bridges exists in the first place and why it is so important is that I don't think a lot of people realize that in most cases, when you look at any major museum, only at any given time, only about 5% of the museum collection is actually on display, which I think is an astounding statistic when you think about like the MoMA, when you think about the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, which is also a member of what you guys do, and when you think of even Crystal Bridges. I mean, Crystal Bridges has a lot of artwork that aren't physically on the walls right now, and so what you guys are doing is so important to get the art out there, to get it visible so people can actually see and appreciate it and benefit from it.
Yep. Yeah, there's been a mentality in the museum world, for ages. It's kind of this trophy gathering. Museum cities that have the money buy great things, and they kind of hoard these things. And what we're trying to do is to get museums to think differently about that, because they hoard these things and a lot of them are in storage, and let's get them on the road. And there are a number of museum partners, like working with LACMA, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. They really get it, and they really understand it, and they're doing these types of sharing arrangements. And so they've been a fantastic partner. But again, that's the type of thing that we're really focused on, is is having museums begin to think differently around what their traditional practices have been. It's been interesting too, because some museums, they have an organizational culture where they get it in a heartbeat and they're on board with what we're doing. So another major metropolitan museum, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, they're one of those. They've been a great Art Bridges partner. And they are very interested in getting loads of works of art out the door to partners that they're working with in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. There have been some other museums we've had conversations with, and they're like, I don't know about this yet, this Art Bridges thing. And my sense is we will get them on board eventually, but it's it's one museum at a time. There's no question about that.
Yeah, no, and that's fine. You have to take your time with these things, but I think what's once it starts to take hold and other people see it, then their lack of involvement will probably encourage them and say, you know what, we're missing out on something. We need to be a part of this. So,
yep.
Yeah.
I'll say one thing before we sign off, or a couple of things. I would encourage everyone again, get down to Hendrix College, to the Wingate Museum to see the Walker Evans show. It's fantastic. It's a great show. It's from MoMA and incredible high quality works of art. And it's fantastic that it's there in Conway. The other thing, if you're nearby, come over to Crystal Bridges and take a look at the Cross Pollination show, which is a wonderful show that's been put together, very focused, and that's an Art Bridges sponsored show. And the other thing is, follow us on Instagram. We've got a great team that puts together our Instagram posts. And you can go to the Art Bridges website, which is artbridgesfoundation.org, and sign up for our newsletter so you can learn about what we're doing and different programs that we've got going on all around the country. So we'd love to have more people get involved and see what we're up to.
Yeah, well, now that's perfect. That's kind of a great way to button it up. And I just thank you so much, Paul, for joining us on this episode of Onward Ozarks. You did an outstanding job of articulating the value and vision of Art Bridges and what you guys are doing. And we certainly want to thank Alice Walton for her vision in all of this, because, I mean, again, she is one of the unsung heroes of this community here in Northwest Arkansas. And we appreciate what you're doing to perpetuate that vision that she has so deftly taken hold of. So thank you so much.
That's great. And thanks again, Randy, to you and to the Northwest Arkansas Council. Really appreciate the opportunity, and such a great thing for us to be able to talk with a community here that we don't do a lot with, but we love to know. It's great to have you know what we're up to. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that's it, folks. This is our episode of Onward Ozarks for February 2022. I just want to remind you that Onward Ozarks is a speaker series created by the Northwest Arkansas Council to provide organizations, companies, and individuals a platform to share news, events, and other information with a regional audience. If you have a topic, something that you'd like to see the Northwest Arkansas Council address through this program, please let us know. And more importantly, I just want to remind you, for those that have asked, we are giving out the Uber Eats cards. It's a $15 card for the first 75 people that registered. You must be in Arkansas. You can't be in New York City or LA or someplace else. And we will make sure that we get those cards to you. We have a list, and those cards will go out forthwith via email. Again, thank you for joining us today and taking an hour out of your busy schedule to spend time with the Northwest Arkansas Council and with Art Bridges and Paul Provost. And that's our show for today. We will see you very soon. Peace.